Hello, welcome to the Beginner's Guide to HTML. In this course, we'll be walking through the world of web development and discover how websites work behind the scenes using hypertext markup language, or HTML for short. If you're new to web development, don't worry. We'll take you from HTML novice to pro, covering everything from the very basics to advanced concepts, all in under an hour. As well, if you're worried about complex coding, don't be. It's not as difficult as it initially looks. We'll break down concepts and technical terms into bite-sized pieces, making it super easy for you to follow along. If you're excited to begin this course, subscribe to the channel and click on the like button for this video. As well, please share this video with your fellow aspiring developers. Without further ado, let's jump right into our beginner's guide to HTML. Let's begin by looking at how websites work. For instance, imagine you want to visit a website. Here's where the web browser comes in. When you type the website's URL or address into the browser's address bar and hit enter, your browser sends a request to the server where the website's files are stored. Now, the web server will process your request, and once it's processed, it will resend back the website's files. These files include HTML as well as CSS and JavaScript. Now, it is the browser's job to interpret these files, or in essence, interpret the HTML to determine the structure and layout of the web page. And this is in essence, at a very high level, how websites work. You have a browser and you have a web server. They communicate between each other, and the web server is providing HTML files for the content and structure of the web pages. Let's now take a look at a real-life example. In our browser, we're going to open wikipedia.com. And when we open this website, we see the home page. Now, if we right-click on the page in the browser and select View Page Source, we will actually see the HTML that the browser is rendering to display the home page. And this demonstrates that browsers work using HTML. So, let's now move on to understand the anatomy of HTML. Think of a web page as a compiled Lego masterpiece, made up of small blocks to create the bigger puzzle. Each block, or HTML element in this case, has a specific job, like showing text, image, or video. By putting these HTML blocks together in different ways, designers and developers create the web pages you see on the internet. Now let's take a look at the anatomy of an HTML element to see how this fits together. The main parts of an HTML element are as follows. The opening tag, which consists of the name of the element. In our example, we're using the paragraph element, which is expressed using the letter P. And the opening element is wrapped in opening and closing angle brackets. This notation states where the element begins and starts to take effect. In this case, where the paragraph begins on our web page. The second part of the HTML element is the closing tag. This is the same as the opening tag, except that it includes a / before the element name. This states where the element ends, in this case, where the paragraph ends. Failing to add a closing tag is one of the standard beginner errors and can lead to strange results. So when we're creating our HTML web pages, we need to ensure we have an opening tag and we have a closing tag. And the last part of an HTML element is the content. This is the content of the element, which in this case, in our example, is just text that we want to display in the paragraph. So in summary, in HTML, an element is comprised of an opening tag, the closing tag, and the content together. In HTML, elements can also have attributes that look like the following. Attributes contain extra information about the element that you don't want to appear in the actual content. Here in this example, class is the attribute name and editor node is the attribute value. These attributes are used to give element a non-unique identifier or apply a CSS style sheet, which we will cover in a separate video. One more thing that we'll cover is that you can put elements inside other elements too. This is called nesting. If we wanted to state that our cat is very grumpy, we could wrap the word very in a strong element, which means that the word is to be strongly emphasized as shown. You do, however, need to make sure the elements are properly nested. In the example, we open the P element or paragraph element first, then the strong element. Therefore, we have to close the strong element first, then the paragraph element. Now, let's get into creating our HTML website project together. To create our first HTML website, we first need to choose a code editor. I recommend and use Visual Studio Code. To install this on your computer, visit code.visualstudio.com and on the web page, click on the download button. Once you have Visual Studio installed, we're going to open the code editor. In the code editor, we will need to install a few extensions to make our development life easy. So we're going to navigate to the extensions tab. And in this, one of the first extensions we're going to install is called Prettier. This extension will help us format our code as we progress in creating our HTML website. So once you have this selected, you will see an install button. Click the install button to install this for your Visual Studio Code editor. The next extension that we need to install on our machine is Live Server. This is an extension that allows us to see the changes live as we are making the website. So it essentially allows us to mimic a web server on our local machine while we are developing our HTML website. So go ahead and install this extension as well. Now, once this extension is installed, what we're going to do is we're going to navigate to the Explorer and we're going to create our first project. To do that, we're going to click on the Open Folder button. We're going to navigate to the desktop in this case, and we're going to create a folder for our project. In this case, we're just going to call it My Website, and we're going to choose to create the folder. Now we're going to open the folder in Visual Studio Code, and once it's open, we're going to give it the necessary permissions, and now we're going to see our folder open. Let's go ahead and create our first HTML page. To do that, we will create a file called index.html. Now all HTML files will need to have .html extension. And the second thing that you might be wondering is, why did we call our first file index.html? And the reason is because when web browsers open websites, let's say google.com, they will look by default for a page called index.html because this page represents the homepage of websites. In our case of our website, we want this page to open, and as a result we have created a page called index.html. Now let's go ahead and create content. To do that, we need to add HTML elements, which we discussed previously. To create an HTML element, we need to first create an opening tag, which we start by creating using an open angle bracket. And when we do, we see a list of HTML elements provided from Visual Studio Code. We can use any of these to create the content for our website. For our example, we will choose to display some simple text. So we will create the P element or the paragraph element. Let's close the opening tag, and we will see the closing tag automatically get added by Visual Studio Code. Now in this HTML element, we will write a message which is hello world. We will save the file, and to open this file in the web browser, we can right click and choose Open with Live Server, because Live Server is an extension that we installed previously. Let's go ahead and click this. We see our website open in the browser and it's displaying the message hello world. One thing that we need to look at is the website address. This might look foreign to you in terms of what this means. The first part of the website address, which is 127.0.0.1, represents the address or location of our website. In our case, we are telling the browser that it needs to find our website on our own local computer. It does not need to communicate on the internet to open the website's files. Instead, it can find them on our own computer. And this is the default numbering that's given by web browsers and web servers to indicate to browsers that the website is located locally. So use this number when we are doing programming or development on your own computer. The next part is :5500. What does this mean? Well, this represents the port number. Or let's take a look at it through an example. Suppose you have a house and you might have multiple doors, a front door or a back door. How do you tell your visitors to go to the front door to get into the house? In the case of a computer, there are many programs that are running and there might be thousands of doors. So the browser works by giving each door a number. In the case of our website, it's using the door number 5500, and through this door it's able to access the website. And this is in essence what this number 5500 means. And the last part of the website address is the file that the browser needs to open, in this case index.html. So now let's go ahead and add some more content to our website. Suppose we want to add a button. We can create that button HTML element, and in this button we want to get the user to click. So we will write this message, click me. We will save, and now we will go back to the browser. We will hit refresh, and we will see a button now get added to our HTML page. So HTML is very simple. Just start to create a list of HTML elements that will allow you to add content that's visible to users. Now, one thing that you will notice is that live server is not automatically refreshing the web page, and that is because we're not actually following the proper format of an HTML document. An HTML document needs to have a certain set of HTML elements which are not necessarily indicating anything that's visible, but they're just indicating the structure of a document. So let's go ahead and explore how we can create proper HTML documents. In our previous example, we created an index.html file and we added HTML elements to show content that's visible to users of the HTML website. Now, we did not follow the correct HTML document format. So let's talk about that. When we're creating a proper HTML document, what we need to do is we need to provide as a first point of reference the doc type. And the doc type is essentially telling the browser what version of HTML we're using. So in the case of the browser, it needs to know the version of HTML so that it can correctly interpret the HTML and follow and render the page per the specifications of that version. Nowadays, HTML5 is the norm. So to tell the browser that we're using HTML version 5, we essentially create a doc type tag and we write HTML within it, as shown on the screen. Now, this doc type is simplified when it comes to HTML version 5. If you're using any of the previous versions of HTML, then you would need to write the corresponding doc type. Now, the next thing that we need to do is, when you're creating a proper HTML document, is create the HTML root element. And this, as the description says in Visual Studio Code, represents the root of the document. So this element represents the start of the document and the end of the document, which the browser uses to interpret and render the page. So create this HTML element in all HTML documents. Apart from this, the next element that we need to have is the head element. The head element represents the metadata of our HTML document. And in the metadata, we can include information such as the title of the document. So if we create a title as an example that says sample web page, and if we were to save and then open our page with live server, we will see that the title of the page is reflected in the tab name. So this essentially allows us to set the title of the web page. The next element that we will now look at is the body HTML element. This body HTML element represents the space in the document where we will have all HTML elements that show content to the user. Now, this is in contrast to the head element, because the head element only contains metadata about the document, which is not meant to be displayed anywhere. But the body element will contain HTML elements that show content to the user. So in the body element, as an example, we can write a message to the user by using a P or paragraph HTML element. In this element, we will just simply write the message hello world. Now, if we were to click save and then go to the browser, we will see the message hello world. So this just demonstrates a proper HTML document that we have now created by adding these HTML elements that are required for the browser. Now let's move on in the course. Previously, we talked briefly about the head element, and the head element represents the metadata about our HTML document. One of the elements that we can include is the title. So in this case, we included a sample web page as a title of our HTML document. There are additional HTML elements that we should include in the head element to indicate information to the browser or to search engines for our website. One of the elements that we should include is the character set information, and we can do so by using the meta HTML element and using the character set attribute. And this allows us to indicate to the browser which character set encoding we're using, because the computers need to understand not only English, they also need to know if we're using any international language characters. So to ensure the browsers render them correctly to users of our website, we need to give this information to avoid any ambiguity or any incorrect assumption that the browser may make. So we can include character set, and we can, as an example, we use UTF-8. This is the most commonly used character encoding, so I recommend using this. The additional information that we can as well include in the head element is the description. So let's include it, and I will explain in a moment what this is used for. So we will use the meta with an attribute called name, which we will give a value of description, and now it will include content. This is my sample web page. We will close the tag. Now you're probably wondering what the description is used for. So let's go back to the browser to demonstrate. In the browser, I've navigated to Google. Now if I search, for example, Star Wars, you will see a set of websites that are included. In the search results, you will see each of the websites have a description. So how do search engines like Google get this? And the answer is through the meta tag that's included in the HTML of the web pages. So if we include this meta tag with an attribute of name with a value of description, we can include the description that we want to show for our web page when it comes to search engines. So this is at minimum the elements that we should have in the head elements, and these elements will provide metadata that's relevant to the browser or the search engines to ensure our websites are shown correctly in different areas. In HTML, elements are divided into two types of categories. The first category is block elements. Block elements, as the name implies, create a block on the web page. And when we use these block elements, they start on a new line, and the width of these elements extend to the full width of the page. In HTML, they are used to structure the layout of the page and usually contain other block or inline elements. An example of a block element that we have seen so far in this course is the paragraph element. The second category of elements in HTML is inline elements, and as the name suggests, they do not start on a new line, and they only take up as much width as necessary. In HTML, they're used to mark up specific parts of the content within a block level element. So what does this mean? Let's take a look through an example. In our sample index.html file, we are right now showing a message to the user, which is hello world, and this message is provided as text within the paragraph HTML element. Now suppose we add another paragraph element to our index.html page. So let's create that. In this new paragraph element, we will write a message. Today is a great day. And we will now save and open our browser. When we do, what we see is the second message is displayed. But there's a nuance that we need to take into account. Because paragraph is a block element, the second paragraph essentially renders itself on a new line. And as well, what you will notice is between the first paragraph and the second paragraph, there is additional spacing. So this is what happens as a default behavior when we're working with HTML block elements. Now let's take a look at inline elements. Inline elements, as we discussed, is used to add additional information within block level elements. Suppose we were to use another inline element called span. So if we do that, we will now move the closing tag to after hello. And now if we save and go to the browser, we will notice nothing has changed. And that's because the span element, in this case, renders itself invisibly. Now there are other inline elements that we can use, and we will touch on those in our next section when we're working with display text. So let's take a look at those. When we are working with HTML documents or web pages in this case, we might have textual information. This textual information might be organized in headings and paragraphs and text phrases. So we have seen already how we can add paragraphs to HTML web pages using the P or the paragraph element. As you will see in the example in the screen right now, we have an empty HTML document, and in the paragraph we're going to add some information about the Eiffel Tower. In this case, we're going to add text that says that the Eiffel Tower was built by Gustav Eiffel. Now, in working with this text, you might want to add emphasis on certain words. In this case, we might want to add emphasis on the name. So to do that, we can use the EM HTML element. And this is an inline element that allows us to highlight the name or add emphasis to text. So let's save this and see what happens in the browser. What we see is essentially the name is italicized. And this is a way for us to add emphasis on certain words when we're working with text in HTML. As well, let's say we wanted to emphasize the importance of more words when we're working with this text. The additional HTML element that we can use is strong. Now we can wrap the words Eiffel Tower within the opening and closing tags, and we will click on save and open our browser. And when we do, we see the words Eiffel Tower are bolded. And the behavior in terms of bolding and italicizing the text is a default behavior the browsers will utilize when they encounter the strong or the M HTML element tags. Previously, we had other tags that were used before HTML5, and those were I, which was short for italicized, or B, which was short for bold. Now, those HTML elements are deprecated, so they are not recommended to be used in modern web applications. Instead, as we have seen in this example, we should be using the tags strong as well as the tags EM for emphasis. Now, this is a way for us to work with paragraphs and manipulate text within those paragraphs to add either emphasis or importance of certain words. Now, suppose in working with HTML web pages, we as well wanted to add headings. How can we do that in HTML? Let's take a look. In HTML, there are 6 heading elements that we can use to add headings to our web pages. Each of the heading elements are noted by H1 to H6 tags. Let's create them. Now, one of the advantages of using Visual Studio Code when you're writing HTML is we can write the tag name and press tab. And by doing that, we will be able to create the opening and closing tags automatically. And now we have the 6 heading elements in our web page. Let's save and open the web browser. We will now see in the web browser the 6 headings shown. Now, these headings are shown in different text sizes, and that's because the web browser interprets heading 1 to be the most important and heading 6 to be the least important of the document. The importance of the headings is essentially intended to allow developers to create a hierarchy. So for the purposes of web pages, heading 1 is assumed to be the main idea or topic of the document, whereas heading 6 is assumed to be the subtopic or subheadings of one of the other headings. So essentially heading 2 would be a subheading of heading 1, heading 3 would be subheading of heading 2, and so on. Now, it is possible for us to create multiple heading 1s. Let's see what happens. In our web page, we'll go back to the code and we will create another heading, and we will call this heading 1 duplicate. Let's save, and when we open the browser, we see heading 1 duplicate as well rendered. There is nothing syntactically wrong with doing this, but this will confuse search engines because search engines will try to look for the first heading 1 element, and they will assume the page is about that topic or that idea that's expressed in heading 1. If we have multiple heading 1s, the search engine will not know or capture the right topic or the intended meaning of the web page. So we need to avoid adding multiple heading 1s. In a best practices situation, what we need to instead do is use subheadings. So assume as an example that we were writing headings that were for the purposes of this HTML beginners course. What would we do? In our code, what we will do is the H1 heading would be the main topic. So this is beginner's guide to HTML. And the subheading, which will be represented by heading 2, we can have the chapters. So we can have, for example, HTML anatomy. And we will create another heading 2, which is displaying text. Now, the HTML anatomy we can break down further by adding heading 3 HTML elements. And in this, we can say anatomy, syntax, and so on. And in displaying text, we can again have another heading 3, which is about displaying paragraphs, etc. And we can keep going. Now, if we remove the other headings, we save the web page and open our browser, we will now see the headings rendered. And this is the correct way for us to add headings in HTML document. What most people do and sometimes confuse is the use of the text size should not indicate the type of heading that's used. Instead, we can change the text sizes by using CSS. So use headings in HTML documents to represent the structure of the document or the structure of the topic that you're trying to write about. And instead use CSS to add styling. Now that is in a nutshell how we can display text in HTML. Let's now talk about special characters in HTML. Now you may have noticed that when we wrote our HTML code thus far in this course, we added additional characters in formatting the code. For example, we have new lines and we have tabs. But when the browser renders this HTML web page, it does not take those into account. So why is that? Well, let's take a look at it through an example. We have a sample sentence that's in the paragraph element or the P element, and it says the Eiffel Tower was built by Gustav Eiffel. Now, if we were to add additional space, save, and then go to the browser, what we will see is there's only still one space between the first word and the second word. Why is that? Well, this is the default behavior of HTML. It ignores additional formatting, so any spacing beyond one spacing between the words and any other line breaks or tabs, because it takes into account that the code itself will be formatted. So how can we add these explicitly when we're writing our HTML web page? The answer is we can use HTML special characters, or entities as they're more officially called. And the way we denote entities in HTML is by using ampersand, and we have a special character code for each of the entities. So for a space, we have an entity called NB space. So this essentially represents a no break space, and we need to end this entity by a semicolon. Now if we were to save this and open our browser, we will see an additional space get added between the first word and the second word. Now if we were to add another entity, we will see that now there is 3 spaces between the first word and the second word. So this is an example to add spacing when we're working with text in HTML. Now suppose we, instead of adding space, we wanted to write the literal HTML tag. So we wanted to, for example, say in the sentence, I am learning HTML, and an example tag is HTML. Now if we were to delete the closing tag and save and render this in the browser, what would you expect? Would you expect that the browser will display HTML as we intend to have written it here? Let's take a look. And to your surprise, you'll see that tag is missing. Why is that? Well, the answer is that in HTML, because it's based on the English alphabets, there are special characters that are reserved. These special characters make up the actual HTML language. So if we use one of these characters in our web page, the browser will try to interpret it as HTML. Therefore, we should use HTML entities when we're trying to output any of these reserved characters. Now in this example, the entity that we can use is, instead of angle brackets, we can use ampersand, and we can say LT, which is short for less than, and for the closing angle bracket we can use ampersand GT, which is short for greater than. Now if we save and open our browser, we will see that our browser is able to interpret the text as we intend it to be, which is to show the HTML element tag. Now if you're probably wondering what are the options or list of entities that we can use, in Visual Studio Code type ampersand and press Ctrl space, and you will now see a list of special characters entities that are available to you to use when you're writing HTML code in your web page. So use these as reference. And that is in a nutshell how we can incorporate special characters or entities in our code. Let's take a look at images in HTML. When we're creating a website, we're going to provide the user a rich and multimedia driven experience. And for that, we will need to add images. So how do we do that? To do that, the first thing that we will do is we're going to actually find an image that we're going to add to our project. So for that, we're going to navigate to Unsplash. Unsplash is a great resource that you might want to use to find images for your website or your project. So for this example, we're going to search for an image of Santorini, and by doing that, we're going to see some results. Now we're going to choose an image for this example, and I'm going to choose this image. We're going to download it, and once it's downloaded, we're going to use it in a project. Now for the moment, we're going to say thank you to Tanya for this great image. In our HTML project, it's a good practice to create a folder that will contain assets. These assets might be images, videos, or audio files. So for that, we're going to create a folder and we're going to call it assets. And now we're going to add our image to this folder. So we're going to use drag and drop to add the image. And we're going to rename the image because the name of the image is used by search engines for. And now we're going to rename this image because search engines use image names as part of their crawl. So for that, we're going to call this image Santorini. Now back to our index.html page. To add an image, the HTML element that we need to use is called img, which is short for image. So for that, we're going to create this element. And one thing that you will notice is this element does not have a closing tag. Why is that? Well, it's because in an image, you cannot have child HTML elements because an image cannot have content within it. An image is just an image that displays the graphic. So for that reason, it's a singular HTML element that cannot have nested children. So now back to this element, we will see there are two attributes that we need to provide when we're adding an img or image element to our index.html file. The first is called source, which is written as src. In the source, we need to provide a path to our image from our project. So for that, we're going to type dot, we're going to type slash, which would indicate from the current folder, we need to navigate to assets. And from that, we need to choose the Santorini.jpg image. Now the next attribute that you will see is the ALT. ALT is short for alternative text. Now if we are using images, we need to provide a descriptive text when we're using the alternative text, because this text will be used by screen readers for our accessibility driven users. So for this, we're going to write a scenic view of Santorini city. Now by providing this, we will enable two things. The first one is the use for screen readers for accessibility driven users, and the second use is for search engines. Search engines will as well use the alternative text to determine what graphic we're displaying, and this will help in our SEO or search engine rankings. Now if we save and navigate to our browser, we will see our image is rendered. As you can probably already determine, the image is massive, and this is not how we want to display our image in the browser. So what can we do? Back to our HTML, the solution to this is to use additional attributes that are part of the img HTML element. And the next attribute that we will look at is called width. The width attribute provides a size in pixels that we can provide to HTML and the browser to indicate what width of the image we want to render on the screen. So in this case, we're going to use 200 pixel. We're going to save, and now we're going to navigate back to the browser. And as you can see, the image is scaled down. In HTML, images also have a height attribute. So if we go back to our index.html and provide a height, so in this case, we'll indicate a height of 200 pixels again, and back to the browser, we will see the image is scaled in terms of width as well as height. But this has an unintended consequence, and as you can see, the image is squashed. Whereas the original image, if we go back and look at Unsplash, the image is a rectangular image that has a greater height compared to width. So in our HTML, by providing both the width and the height, what ended up happening was the browser tried to fit the image in the box. In HTML, all elements essentially follow a box container philosophy. So for an image, when we set a height of 200 pixels and a width of 200 pixels, there was a box that was created, and in that box, the browser is trying to fit the image. And as a result, the image is squashed. Now the solution to this problem is to use CSS. We will touch on CSS in greater detail in another course, but for the purposes of images, a quick way to add CSS is to use the style attribute. in the style attribute, we can indicate for the image an object fit CSS property, and we will use cover. So instead of the browser squishing the image into the container, the image scales to fit the container, and anything that is beyond the bounds of the container will get cropped. So let's say we now choose the value cover. If we save and then go back to the browser, we will see the image is essentially scaled. So it's scaled according to its proportions. And this is a quick way for us to use CSS when we're working with images. Again, the property that we're using for CSS is called object fit. And that is in a nutshell how we can add images to our HTML projects. Let's now take a look at hyperlinks in HTML. Hyperlinks is a way for us to add functionality in HTML to allow users to navigate between pages or navigate to download assets such as images or videos or documents, or to add navigation in between the page sections. Let's take a look at each of these through an example. Now, the first example that we're going to look at is to add a hyperlink to another page in our website. So what we will do is, in our website, we're going to create another page, and we're going to call this page about us.html. And as we discussed previously in the course, there are elements we need to add to create a proper document structure. Now, to do that quickly in Visual Studio Code, what we can do is we can type the exclamation mark and press tab. This will create the basic HTML element tags that we need for a proper HTML document. Now we will save, and in the body we will add a header tag. The header tag is just going to say about us page. So this is a very simple HTML page that we've created. Now back to the index.html page. The way to add a hyperlink for us to navigate from the index.html page to the about us.html page is to use the anchor element, or the a HTML element, and that is created by typing a and pressing tab. Now in this element, you will notice there is an attribute called href, and that is a short form for hypertext reference. So for us to create a navigation link from this page to the about us page, what we can do is we can type dot, which will refer to the current folder, slash, and we can choose about us.html page. And within the anchor element, we can write text that we want to have displayed in the browser that the user can click on to navigate to the About Us page. So in this, we will say navigate to About Us page. Now we will save and open our browser. And as you can see, our browser is now showing a link on our web page. If we click on the link, we're navigated to the About Us page where we see the header. So this is in a nutshell how we can create a link in HTML using the anchor HTML element. Now, one thing that we need to keep in mind when we're creating links is the URL that we're providing in the href attribute. In this example, we use the // which represented from the current folder navigate to the About Us page. An alternate mechanism, and one that is used as a best practice, is to start from the relative URL. So if your website is www.mywebsite.com, by typing / we're telling the browser we're going to navigate from the root of the website. So in this case, the root folder. Because our About Us page is actually located in the root folder of our website, we can simply type / and aboutus.html. Now, if we go back to the browser, we will see the link again, and if we click on the link, we're able to still navigate to the About Us page. One behavior that we will now touch on is what if we want to create links on our web pages that open a new browser window? What we can do is, in our anchor element, we can use an attribute called target. Now this attribute allows us to specify if the link should create a new browser window. And if we choose the option which is blank and click on save and navigate to a browser, what we will see happen is that when we click on the link, the browser opens a new window. So this is a behavior that we might employ when we want to avoid disrupting the user flow on our HTML pages. Instead, we want to navigate the user in a different window. Let's now take a look at the second use case of links in HTML. And that is if we want to open an image. So in our project, we currently have an assets folder, and within the assets folder, we have an image called Santorini. Now what we will do is, in the anchor element for the href attribute, instead of navigating to the about us.html page, we will navigate to assets and santorini.jpg, and we will get rid of the attribute target. Now in our anchor element, we will change the text and we will call it open image. If we navigate back to our browser, we will see the link open image. Now if I click on the link, the image opens, and that is because the browser is now navigating to the image instead of the about us.html page. Let's suppose instead of opening the image, we wanted to allow the user to download the image. What can we do? Back to our code, in the anchor element, we will add an attribute called download, and this attribute does not have any value. It simply indicates download. So we will now save, open our browser again, and when we click on the link, we will see the image is now downloaded instead of opening in the browser itself. So this is the second use case of links where we can open images, and the same can be implied if instead of an image we had a video, audio, or any other file. Let's now take a look at the third use case of hyperlinks in HTML. Now what we will do is we will get rid of the existing hyperlink that we just created, and we will get rid of the paragraph that we currently have in our page. Instead, we will create a heading. So we'll create a heading 1, and we will just call it random text, and we'll create a heading 2 to represent a section. So what we're doing is essentially trying to create a page with lots of text. So in heading 2, we'll say section 1, and we'll now add a paragraph. In this paragraph, we're going to write a lot of text, and this will allow the page to scroll. Now what we will do is essentially create another section. So heading 2 again, and we'll call this section 2, and again write a lot of text, and we'll repeat this again to create a section 3, and we'll create a paragraph. In this, we'll add a bunch of text again. Now if we navigate to the browser, we'll see 3 sections in our web page. Now what if we want to allow the user to easily navigate between section 1, 2, and 3 by clicking on a link? You might have seen this behavior in some websites where you have a lot of text or articles that are published. So back to our code, what we will do as a first step is for each of the headings, we will add an ID attribute. The ID attribute essentially allows HTML to create a unique identifier for the browser. Now this unique identifier should be a string. So in this case, we'll just call it section 1, and note there is no spacing. The unique identifier should not have any blank spaces. And as well, because it's unique, we cannot use the same string or the ID for any other HTML element, because by doing so, it will confuse the browser if we have duplicates. So repeating this exercise, we'll go to the other section headings. So we have section 2, we'll change the ID, and we have section 3, and we'll give it a unique ID as well. Now if we go back to the top, and after heading 1, we create a hyperlink. So for that, we'll type A, press tab, and in the href, now instead of navigating to a file, so either an about us.html file or an asset, what we will do is we will type hash, and we will type now the ID where we want the user to navigate to. So in this case, section 3, see section 3. We will click save, and now if we open our browser, we will see the link that is displayed. If we click on the link, we will see we're able to jump to section 3. And this is a way for us to use hyperlinks in HTML to assist in navigation for the user. Now you might have seen one last functionality, which is at the bottom of pages, there is a link that is for jump to top, essentially to allow the user to jump to the top of the page. And what we can do for that is, if we go back to our code, at the end of the last paragraph, we will create another hyperlink. And in this, we will create a hyperlink with just the hash. And in the body of the hyperlink, we will say jump to top, and we will save, open our browser, and now when we click on the jump to top link, we're able to jump to the top of the page. So this in a nutshell captures the 3 main use cases of hyperlinks in HTML. Let's take a look at how we can add video to our HTML web pages. Now, because we're using HTML5, adding video is super easy because browsers support video playback as a default functionality. So for this example, what we're going to do is we're going to navigate to our browser, and we're going to use this website called pexels.com. Now this is a great resource if you're looking for royalty-free images and videos for use in your personal projects. Now for this example, we're going to search for a beach and we're going to look at videos. Now for the video, this one seems really interesting, which is a beach by the cliffside. So for this, what we're going to do is we're going to download the video and we're going to say thank you to Mikhail for this great video. We're going to navigate back to the Visual Studio Code project and we're going to, in our assets folder, use our video. Using drag and drop, we're going to add the video and we're going to rename the video to something more meaningful. Now back to our index.html page, we're going to use this video by using the video HTML element. And by default, you'll see there is a src attribute, and src is short for source. So for this video source, we're going to use the relative URL. We're going to go to our assets folder, and within that, we're going to use the beach video mp4. So let's save our changes and open our browser. And as you will see, the video is now rendered. And there are a few problems that you will notice. One, the video is not scaled to the page. And second, there are no controls for us to play the video. So that's not the behavior that we want. What we can do is we can use other attributes that are part of the video HTML element. We have a controls attribute, and this is a Boolean attribute. So for this video, we can enable controls by providing a value of true for the controls attribute. Now in HTML, this has the same behavior as if we only were to write controls. Because it's a Boolean attribute, HTML5 allows us to use short form to indicate true value for attributes. So this is the same as saying true. So we can either write it as more explicitly with a true value, or we can simply mention the attribute name to indicate a true value. So we're going to use controls. The next attribute that we will use is width. Because we want the video to scale to 100% of the width of the page, we will choose a width value of 100%. Now back to the browser, and you will see the video is scaled to the width of the page. And as well, you will see at the bottom there are controls that allow us to play the video. The next functionality that we will look at for the video is if we want the video to autoplay in the browser when the page loads. So for that, we're going to navigate back to our code and we're going to add an attribute called autoplay. By adding this attribute, we're telling the browser to autoplay this video. So if we open the browser again and refresh our page, what you will notice is while we still have the autoplay attribute and it is enabled, the autoplay doesn't work. And that is because different browsers work with different behaviors. Google Chrome will disable autoplay because they don't want to spam their users. So for that, as a developer, we need to ensure that we don't rely on autoplay. Instead, we should provide controls to the user to enable them to play the video by their own choosing. Now let's take a look at few more attributes, and if we go back to Visual Studio Code, the two more attributes that we will look at is muted, and this indicates that the video should start as muted. So if autoplay is enabled, the video will be muted, and this is a good behavior that we should have, because when users navigate to our website and if they have their speakers enabled, we don't want them to be shocked or get surprised by the video playing in the background. So this is a good behavior for us to have if autoplay is enabled. The next feature that we will look at is loop, and what this does is essentially it loops the video when it reaches the end. So this allows the video to continuously run from start to finish until the user explicitly chooses to stop the video. So this is another behavior that is common in HTML websites. So now let's go back to the browser, and what you will see is when the video reaches the end, it will again start from the beginning. So this is the loop functionality in HTML5 video element. Now let's take a look at two more functionalities. Back to our source code, we're going to get rid of the source attribute, and instead what we're going to do is in the video HTML element, we're going to nest an explicit source HTML element. And what this allows us to do is provide multiple source videos that we want the browser to play. And what this does is basically allows us to provide the browser with different file formats or different file locations in case one of the files fails to load from our server. So this is a behavior that websites use to have a backup video if the intended video fails to load. So in the source HTML element, we'll provide a src attribute, and in this we'll use the relative URL to again provide reference to the video. Now if we save, go back to the browser, you will notice nothing has changed, and that is because the browser is rendering the video in the source element, which is the same as providing the source attribute in the video element. Let's assume that instead we want to have a backup video. So we'll navigate to Pexels, and in Pexels what we will do is we will download another video, and this video we'll assume is our backup video. So if we now go back to Visual Studio Code, we'll drag this new video to the assets folder. We'll rename this video to beach backup video, navigate to our index.html file, and we'll add another source HTML element, and in this we'll provide the source attribute, which is through a relative URL. We'll provide assets and reference to the backup video. Because this is a backup video, we want the browser to fail to load the first intended video. So for that we'll provide an incorrect file name. So this will cause the browser to not be able to load the first video and instead jump to the backup video. If you go to the browser, what you will see is the backup video is loaded. So this is an example of us using the source HTML elements as nested elements within the video elements. So this is the functionality to add backup video sources for us to play in the browser. And this sums up the video functionality in HTML. Thank you for watching this course. If you found it helpful, please click on that subscribe button and hit the like button. As well, stay tuned for more videos to come. Thank you again.